Michigan had a plan. Dig what's underground, cut what's above it. The state sat on the richest copper deposits in the Western Hemisphere. Its forests were so dense that surveyors in the 1830s called them permanent. Pines so tall and thick that logging them seemed like the work of generations. Detroit would become the most productive industrial city in human history. Michigan was going to be wealthy forever. The copper ran out. The pines came down in a single generation. Detroit is its own episode. What got left behind is what we're here to see. Foundations in the forest where nobody goes. A cemetery in Crawford County where the headstones are gone but the bodies are not. An opera house in the Upper Peninsula that once held Sarah Bernhardt, standing now in a town of 700. A stamp mill on Lake Superior where 500 people used to live. Now a smokestack and a concrete maze on a black sand beach. 10 of them. Let's go. Number 10, Deward, Crawford County. Deward is still on the maps. Some of the older county map books that locals keep in their cars still show it, right there between Gaylord and Grayling, with a road leading in. Drive to where the town should be and you'll find forest. Not ruins inside a forest, just forest, uninterrupted, with the Manistee River moving quietly through it. The story of Deward is the story of a will. David Ward was a Detroit lumberman who found in Crawford County the last great stand of virgin white pine in Michigan's Lower Peninsula, 90,000 acres of timber that had been growing, mostly undisturbed, for centuries. In 1901, he built what his estate called the most modern sawmill around it. The site included a rail depot, a commissary, a school, housing for 800 workers, and a mill that ran 20 hours a day, producing 15 train carloads of cut pine every single day. At its peak, Deward was shipping pine to Chicago and Milwaukee by the boatload. Ward died before his project was complete. His will specified that the trustees managing his estate had 12 years to liquidate it, not to manage it sustainably, but to liquidate it. The mill that was designed to harvest these forests over generations instead went to a 20-hour daily schedule specifically to run out the clock on a dead man's estate. In March 1912, the last pine was cut. The mill was dismantled and hauled away. The workers left. By 1932, the last resident was gone. Today, the best way to find Deward is from County Road 612 down a 2-track with a small binocular sign to a parking area by the river. The concrete foundations of the sawmill are still there, massive blocks the size of pickup trucks, sitting in the regrown forest next to the water. Walk the woods and you find house foundations scattered through the undergrowth, and the faint raised lines of old railroad grades disappearing into the trees. The mill produced 52 million board feet of lumber in a single year. The evidence that it existed is the size of a small parking lot. Less than 30 miles from Deward, down a 1-lane dirt track in Beaver Creek Township just south of Grayling, there is a clearing in the pines. In the clearing are about 90 graves. Most of the headstones are gone, stolen or broken by vandals, and the remaining markers are often just stones placed by families who knew where their people were buried even without the stones. A granite monument near the entrance describes what happened. One grave, belonging to a 15-day-old infant named Faye Richardson, still has toys and shells left by modern visitors. This is all that remains of Pere Cheney. In 1874, a lumber town of 1,500 people stood here. There was a sawmill, a train depot, a post office, and a town that briefly served as county seat of Crawford County. In 1893, diphtheria arrived. The disease moved through Pere Cheney twice. The first outbreak killed most of the town's children. Before the population could recover, fires spread through the settlement, and no one is certain whether the sparks came from the mills or from neighboring towns deliberately burning a diseased community to contain the spread, because no record survived to settle the question. Diphtheria returned in 1897. By 1901, the population was 25. By 1917, it was 18, and the land was sold at public auction. Today, the clearing where the town stood is indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. No building outlines, no pavement, no evidence at ground level that 1,500 people built their lives here. The cemetery is a mile from where the town was, down its own separate track. The legend of Pere Cheney involves a woman accused of witchcraft and a curse placed on the town's children. Whether any of that is true is unknowable. Whether the diphtheria killed the children is documented in full detail twice. Number 8. Freda, Houghton County. The road to Freda from Houghton goes west along the Keweenaw Peninsula to a spot on Lake Superior you would not find by accident. The last stretch is the covered road, a one-lane dirt path through forest narrow enough to fit one car at a time. What you find on the other side is a village of 40 people and, on the cliff above Lake Superior, a smokestack. Below the cliff, down a steep footpath, is the site of the Champion Copper Mill, several acres of concrete foundations and rebar that visitors describe as feeling like a large open amphitheater. The mill crushed copper-bearing rock with 5 massive stamps, mixed the pieces with Lake Superior water and iron balls, and produced a slurry that was 40% copper or more. This slurry went by rail to the Houghton smelter and became ingots. The mill ran from 1901 until its last whistle blew on November 4, 1967. It was the final copper mill standing in the entire Keweenaw. At its peak, Freda had 500 residents, a church, a school, a hotel, a doctor, a movie theater, and a railroad station. The town was named after the Boston Company owner's daughter. That detail captures the distance between the people making decisions about the Upper Peninsula and the people living with them. When the mill closed, a 2-year salvage operation stripped everything of value, machinery, pipe systems, even the steel rails from the railroad. What could not be taken was left: concrete, the smokestack, and a man-made waterfall still running over a sandstone cliff into the lake. The beach below is black with stamped sand. Among it, visitors find beach glass ground smooth by 66 years of Lake Superior. The glass came from the town. The mill made the sand. Number 7. Fayette, Delta County. Fayette sits on the Garden Peninsula, which juts south from the Upper Peninsula into northern Lake Michigan, and its location was chosen for what it was, not what it looked like. When Jackson Iron Company manager Fayette Brown selected the site in 1867, he saw a harbor for shipping, limestone cliffs for flux, and dense hardwood forest for charcoal, the 3 inputs for pig iron. He built the rest. For 24 years, Fayette was a company town of roughly 500 people, immigrants from Canada, Finland, Norway, and the British Isles, producing 229,000 tons of pig iron shipped south to become railroad rail. The town had a hotel, town hall, doctor's office, company store, and worker housing tiered by class, supervisors in frame houses, laborers in log homes next to Slag Beach, the town's garbage dump and poorest address. In 1891, the Jackson Iron Company closed the operation. The surrounding forest was gone. A more efficient smelting process elsewhere had killed the economics. Most workers left within a season. What makes Fayette unusual is what stayed. 22 original structures are still standing on Snail Shell Harbor, stabilized by the state of Michigan since 1959. The twin blast furnaces are still there. Enormous stone and brick structures that still contain the charcoal they were last loaded with. The company office, hotel, machine shop, town hall, warehouse, all standing. Walk the company store and you can see where the shelves were, sunlight coming through glassless window frames. The floor of the open-roofed warehouse is now soft grass. The limestone cliffs above the harbor are unchanged, reflecting in the same water that carried the iron ingots out. Admission requires a Michigan recreation passport. Allow at least 2 hours. Number 6. Central Mine, Keweenaw County. Central Mine opened in 1854, and for 34 years, it was one of the most productive copper operations in the Keweenaw. By 1887, the town around it had 1,300 residents, Cornish miners, Finnish workers, their families, with its own church, school, and the rhythms of a community that had decided this was where it lived. The mine closed in 1898. The population that had been 1,300 in 1887 dropped to 100 by 1905 and reached single digits by the mid-20th century. The houses that remained were left largely in place, and over the last quarter century, the Keweenaw County Historical Society has been restoring them with volunteer labor and donated funds. What you find at Central Mine today, 4 miles north of Phoenix off US 41, is a dozen restored homes from the 1880s, a visitor center, and the Central Mine Methodist Church, a white clapboard building that still holds a single annual service in late July, attended primarily by the descendants of the miners who built it. People drive from across the Midwest for that service. They come back to the church their great-grandparents attended in a town that otherwise no longer exists, to sit in the pews their families sat in, to acknowledge that something happened here that deserves acknowledgement. The church is open. The visitor center explains the mine. The houses are the most honest part: domestic-scale rooms, worn floors, the proportions of a life lived in a company town in the 1880s. Stand in any of them and the 1,300 people are almost audible. Number 5. Calumet, Keweenaw Peninsula. Calumet needs a correction before it begins. It is not abandoned. 700 people live there. The Calumet Theater still performs. The downtown is still standing. None of this qualifies as a ghost town. What Calumet is a city that was killed. At the turn of the 20th century, the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company produced more than half of the copper in the United States from mines running more than a mile deep beneath the township. The population of Calumet Township reached nearly 26,000. The density was comparable to Manhattan. Calumet was fully electrified with a streetcar system. The Calumet Theater, the first municipally owned theater in America, hosted Sarah Bernhardt. The mine owners built mansions that still line the residential streets. Calumet was going to be a great American city. On July 23, 1913, the miners struck 9,000 of them, demanding an 8-hour day, safer conditions, and the end of the one-man drill that reduced company labor costs and miners' lives in equal measure. The strike ran 9 months. On Christmas Eve 1913, the Women's Auxiliary organized a holiday party for striking families at the Italian Hall on 2nd Street. Hundreds gathered upstairs, children waiting for gifts from Santa Claus. Someone shouted fire. A stampede toward the single staircase crushed 73 people. 59 of them were children. The identity of whoever shouted has never been established. Woody Guthrie wrote a song about it in 1945. The mass funeral drew 20,000 mourners. The strike ended in April 1914. The miners lost, the copper thinned, the price fell. Thousands left for Detroit and the automobile plants. The Calumet and Hecla mines closed in 1943. The final strike in 1968 ended with the owners announcing that all strikers' employment was terminated. There were no jobs to return to. The pumps were turned off and the shafts filled with water. Today, the Italian Hall building is gone, demolished in 1984. The arched doorway through which 73 people tried to flee was preserved. It stands alone on 2nd Street as a small park, an arch that opens onto air. Visitors walk through it in any direction. Most stop on the other side for a moment before moving on. Baltic is 6 miles southwest of Houghton. What remains of it is a mine shaft that goes 3,800 feet into the earth, the deepest shaft in the copper country, and the fact that the Baltic Mining Company extracted nearly 300 million pounds of copper from the rock beneath Houghton County before ceasing operations in 1931. The town that grew up around that shaft had a name, a post office, and people who built their lives around a single commodity. When the commodity stopped paying, the town stopped having a reason. The buildings that defined it were removed. The shaft, descending a nearly unimaginable distance into the ground, sealed now and fenced, is the only marker left with any physical presence. Standing next to a capped mine shaft that descends almost 4/5 of a mile into the earth, surrounded by the ordinary landscape of the Upper Peninsula in every other direction, conveys something about the relationship between industrial ambition and physical scale that photographs of the shaft do not quite transmit. It takes a moment to adjust your sense of what you are looking at. Number 3. Rawsonville, Washtenaw County. Rawsonville sits at the bottom of a lake, specifically Belleville Lake, 15 miles east of Ann Arbor, where the Huron River was dammed in 1925 to generate hydroelectric power. The rising water covered what had been, since the Civil War era, a mill town with a sawmill, shops, and enough infrastructure to support a post office and a working community. The town's specific failure came before the dam. Rawsonville's residents spent decades trying to make their settlement a railroad hub, and the railroads chose to pass through other towns instead. Without a railroad, businesses migrated toward places that had one, and the population thinned. By the time the dam went in and the water came up, enough people had already left that the flooding of the remainder felt less like a disaster than a conclusion. Rawsonville is technically visible. On clear days with low water levels, old foundations and structural remnants can sometimes be seen from the surface. A historical marker near the lake identifies the site. The lake itself is pleasant and recreational, surrounded by the suburban infrastructure of modern Washtenaw County. Below it, the grid of a town that missed its railroad connection in the 19th century and got flooded in the 20th lies in whatever configuration the water left it. Michigan has several underwater ghost towns. Rawsonville is the one closest to a major university, and therefore the one most likely to be the subject of a dissertation that nobody outside academia will read. Number 2. Central and Delaware Mines, Keweenaw County. The Keweenaw Peninsula is a finger of land that extends into Lake Superior from Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and in the mid-19th century it contained the richest copper deposits in the world. America's first major mineral rush happened here, before California gold, before Colorado silver, and it built towns with an urgency and density that the remoteness of the location made more remarkable, not less. Delaware Mine opened in 1846, 2 years after Michigan's first state geologist formally identified the copper deposits. The town that grew around it reached 1,100 residents before the ore thinned and the population left, declining from 1,100 to 25 by 1893. The houses and buildings were left where they stood. Decades of Upper Peninsula winters worked on them steadily. What remains today, accessible from US 41 and visible from the road in places, are old houses in various states of collapse, the mine head frame, and the sense that the forest is conducting a slow, patient reclamation of every surface the miners touched. Walk the Delaware site, and you find the evidence of a community that was built with permanence in mind. Multi-room houses, not bunkhouses, structures intended for families who believed they were staying, and then left with a completeness that permanence does not usually accommodate. People built for the long term and then walked away from what they built. The Upper Peninsula is full of this particular combination, and it never stops being strange. Number 1. The Keweenaw Copper Country as a whole. This requires stepping back from individual towns to look at the scale of what happened across the entire peninsula. The Keweenaw copper industry ran from the 1840s through 1969, and in that span produced 11 billion pounds of copper, the metal that wired the United States, that supplied the Union Army's shell casings, that fed both world wars' appetite for industrial metal. Before California gold, before Colorado silver, this was America's first mineral rush, and it happened on a remote finger of land jutting into Lake Superior that receives 15 feet of snow a year. The towns that grew up to house the miners were built at a scale that matched the ambition company-funded libraries, hospitals, bathhouses, theaters, parks, churches, in half a dozen languages for the Cornish, Finnish, Croatian, and Italian workers who came here because the wages were real, and so was the copper. The companies built these things out of paternalism and practicality both, You cannot keep 30,000 people through an Upper Peninsula winter without providing some reason to stay. Drive the Keweenaw today, and you pass through the evidence of that ambition at intervals the whole length of the peninsula. Mine head frames still stand in the trees. Company-built houses remain in towns where the company is a century gone. Stone engine houses were built to last, standing intact with their windows empty. The rock piles, stamped sand, and poor rock that came out of the mines and has nowhere to go, run for miles along the lakeshore, dark against the water. The Keweenaw National Historical Park was established in 1992 to keep this legible. It exists because someone decided in the 1980s that what happened here, the scale of the ambition, the weight of the failure, the particular combination of industrial success and community destruction was worth preserving as evidence. The copper that wired the country came out of this ground. The towns it built are mostly empty. The shaft goes 3,800 feet down. The pumps were turned off in 1969. The water is still there.